Today on Public Research.
Good policing is boring. It's only interesting when something goes wrong.
Former Baltimore police officer and criminal justice professor Peter Moskos, the author of Cop in the Hood, In Defense of Flogging, and the upcoming book Back from the Brink, Inside the NYPD and New York City's extraordinary 1990s crime trial, joins me to discuss the 2020 summer of BLM, in retrospect, the legacy of the killing of George Floyd, subway crime, New York City, Chicago, and how Democrats should talk about crime and disorder. You know, we're in such an interesting place. I saw a video, I don't know if you saw it by any chance, of a San Francisco, city council meeting, and this woman with a shaved head was screaming about, she was like, I still believe in defunding the police. And she was talking about George Floyd. And she said, does anybody else still care about that?
So, I woke up in 2020. Did you? Or were you just fucking faking it? You know what I learned in 2020 from the murder of George Floyd? You always film the cops. I want to defund the fucking police still. I want to abolish the fucking police still. Okay? I don't know what happened to that sentiment. It's only 5 years since 2020, right? Is there a time machine? Are we like 100 years from 2020? Like, what the fuck happened?
It was so interesting because I realized I haven't heard anybody say the name George Floyd in years at this point. But
2020 was a strange year.
Yeah, exactly. How do you look back on what that was?
I mean, it was a stranger. Even I don't know how I look. I look back as the sort of year America went crazy. At least with regard to policing, the idea that because cops murdered a man in Minnesota, we have to tear it all down and start over. I mean, and the harm of that movement was real, and it wasn't everywhere, but departments were defunded. Murders skyrocketed. There was less policing, and we still have. I mean, the violence has kind of gotten back to 2019 levels, but I don't know. A lot of people died in the meantime. I mean, a city like Portland, Oregon, it was just amazing to watch them make choices of kind of self-destruct. It went from, one of America's safest cities to, like, I don't want to say fun fact, it's not fun, but a little bit of trivia, I mean, almost, but it's, the black murder rate in Portland is, or at least was recently, higher than the black murder rate in Baltimore, where I police. Like, that just blew my mind. That we would sort of give up on the idea that we can indeed police our way to public safety. So, yeah, I mean, it was frustrating professionally because I felt like, I mean, not me personally having accomplished these things, but the field that I'm involved in of trying to make policing better and save lives, everything was trending in the right direction. Incarceration was going down, crime was going down, arrests were down, police use of force by most measures was probably going down. It's a little harder to measure. And then we decided it all needed to be destroyed and rebuilt. I mean, it was just the abolitionist movement for a brief moment, which probably has the support of 5% of Americans, somehow became the dominant political movement, at least in democratic cities. And it was harmful.
It's probably the dumbest political slogan I've ever heard, because literally the people who say it, then when they're asked about it, like when people say like, what do you mean get rid of the police, blah, blah, blah. What eventually happens is they engage in a conversation and like basically like 10 minutes later, they basically tell the person, well, we don't mean all police. We'd still have some other people we'd call like social workers, and we just want more social safety. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever seeing.
But some of them do want to get rid of all police. I mean, what I realize, look, there are a lot of people, myself included, who want better policing. Some of those are more anti-police than others, but there's still this sort of idea that we're trying to improve things. And one thing I realized in 2020 was a lot of so some of the defunders were in that camp. They saw problems. They wondered why these problems exist. Um, Often those problems were sort of didn't reflect reality, but they thought it did. Okay. Um, I mean, yeah, one of the bizarre things I ended up saying in 2020 was, cops shoot white people too. Like, it was just to have spent 20 years in this field professionally and then have to, say things like that. I was like, what has happened? But the abolitionists that I think spearheaded the movement that got traction that year, they do want to abolish police. They're not. It's not just vibes, and they're still there. I mean, they keep kind of chipping away at policing, often at a local level. But I think they have to be confronted for what they are, which is abolitionists. I mean, they're not ashamed of that fact either, but they don't want better policing. And the reforms often are not designed to improve policing. They're designed to continue down a path to abolition and revolution and utopia after that. But so I do try and divide. There are those who want to reform to improve policing and criminal justice, and those who want to tear the system down. And the latter shouldn't have a seat at the table even.
When you said white people shot by police, my mind immediately went to a video I'll never forget, probably that Daniel Shaver.
Yeah, in Las Vegas.
I think it was in Tempe, Arizona, I thought. The one where they're like, put your hands behind your back and cross your legs and then get on the side and do the thing. And his shorts fell down.
Well, he's crawling in the hallway.
Yeah.
Right?
Put both your hands on the top of your head and interlace your fingers. Take your feet and cross your left foot over your right foot.
Right?
Yeah. Horrible.
I think that was Vegas. Might have been Tempe. But yeah, and you know what? That one's not even the worst. There's one that happened in Paradise, California, whose name I can't think of, where it is. It's worth saying.
Would they suffocate the guy?
No, guy was in a car crash.
Oh.
The vehicle rolls over, and guy pokes his head out, and the cop shoots him. And then and it was originally judged justified, and there was a small protest, and eventually that cop actually was convicted. But the fact that it was sort of covered up at first. Officer Patrick Feaster, this was 2015, by the way. But if you want to find the single worst police-involved shooting that I've seen, and there's others that are pretty bad about it, but yeah.
Well, the thing about the Shaver case that was so amazing was the cop who killed him was like retired and now gets a pension for emotional distress or PTSD.
I will say this because I do remember, and I don't think it was a good shooting, and I'm not defending it. However, there was a motion where the guy started reaching for his waistband to keep his pants from falling down, which is why the cop shot. I'm not saying that's a good reason to shoot, but there was something there. Some of these shootings, there's nothing there, and you go, what is going on? But if there've been cops have shot and killed a bit over 1,000 people now since we actually started keeping track in 2015 after Ferguson. It's been surprisingly consistent. But if we want to reduce the number of people shot without, making public safety worse, the difference we need to get away from the exclusive focus on race. There are departments where cops shoot people, 5 and 10 times as often as they do in New York City. And there are many reasons for that, but there are these huge disparities, but often at a jurisdictional level. And it comes down to culture and training. And of course, number of cops and, I mean, there are other variables, but these cities are all like medium-sized cities west of the Mississippi, like Oklahoma City, Albuquerque, Riverside, California, Bakersfield, Tulsa. Um, and I don't live there, so, and I haven't done research there, but it could be better. But by and large, these cities have a very low percentage black population compared to the U.S. and they don't, so that doesn't, get media
So
traction and
you said that there was some defunding. Now, my understanding was there was talk, like in hilariously, I think the Minnesota City Council, what did they like announce it, and then like a week later, they're like, yeah, we didn't, yeah, actually, we're not doing that.
Minneapolis, I think, did. New York City did. Portland did. Seattle did. Los Angeles did. Austin, Texas did. This is the part I hear this too, what never actually happened. That's why we have the term gaslighting when people say that, or they're just wrong. I mean, I'm not saying you're gaslighting.
I was just wrong then.
Yeah, I mean, that's different. But no, there was defund. And it was done maliciously. It was done without, look, public policy, we can say, reasonable people can say, I think the police department should be smaller. So let's make a 5-year plan to, cut whatever, 10, 15% of the budget. And the, police department will at some levels salute and follow orders. But these cuts, even though there were it was almost $1 billion of a $6 billion budget in New York City. The cost of policing is mostly labor. I'm going to say 90% roughly, give or take. Don't quote me on that one, but it's about 90%. So to cut 10% of a budget means you have to cut literally everything else if you're not going to fire police officers, which may or may not be even possible, but it'd be horrible to do. So the impact of seemingly minor cuts when they're not planned can be bad. There is the one reason people say defund never happened is because it actually ended up costing these departments a lot more money because they weren't able to hire anybody and they had to pay more overtime to older cops who make more money, which doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means it failed at yet another level. But it did. And also the talk of defund were in places where it didn't happen, still could affect policing. Nothing positive came from that debate. And of course, often it was said, well, if we just fund these social programs, like I know New York City better than most places because I live here. And social services in New York City get so much more money than the police department, 3-4 times as much. Whatever problems there are not going to be solved by adding a little sliver from the police department budget. We could, drastically rebalance everything, but it was never about making things better. It was really about hurting police.
I was joking to a friend that I was asking him like, what was the legacy of all the stuff in 2020? And I was thinking, the legacy is that now the starting salary of the Chicago Police Department is higher. Because nobody wants to be a police officer. Yeah.
And in New York City, they just cut back drastically the requirement that cops have college credits. And, as a professor who teaches cops and people who want to be cops, I have a vested interest in college-educated cops, let's just say. But it may be necessary because when I worked in Baltimore, there was no college requirement, and I know you can get many great men and women who don't have college degrees or don't follow that track, and it's good they became cops. So you need that, but it's sad to see. I mean, of course, more money for cops but it's still not really helping the recruitment effort enough, at least.
So 2020 happens, and the narrative I've heard, and tell me if this is correct, is that police just looked at that and they said, okay, you want us to just stay in our cars? Okay, fine. Is that what happened? Yeah.
To some extent, yeah. There was a push and a pull, but there was depolicing, and that you can quantify by looking at, arrest numbers and traffic stop numbers. And first of all, when the protests and riots that happened, that takes policing, and so those cops would have been doing normal policing and instead had to either police or babysit, riots or protests. So it was, it was just a huge suck of resources. So that alone would cause less policing. And then you had city councils on, depends on the jurisdiction, but, saying we don't want car chases. In Chicago, they say we don't want foot chases. We don't want you pulling people over for, minor violations. We don't want pretextual stops. They wanted less policing and they got it. So as a cop, first of all, you see this and you don't want to be in the news, and have to, go into hiding. I used to, in the old days, you actually had to mess up to get in trouble. What changed is now cops were actually policing correctly and still becoming national news. And so then, so that's all the push for less policing. But then the pull was, at some point you see someone in an alley and you don't know what they're doing. You don't have to stop that person. But you think it's suspicious. You have legal justification to stop that person. If you can articulate that suspicion. But do you? And I mean, cops would say, look, I'm going to keep going because what if I stop him and he is wanted for a warrant? What if he resists arrest? What if it turns physical and someone's filming this? Suddenly, it's my ass on the line. Like why, the old cliche or trope is if you don't work, you can't get in trouble. But there's a lot of truth to that. And I'm sort of afraid a little bit, I don't think I'm old enough to be the grouchy old man, though maybe I'm a grouchy younger man. But I think there's a generation of cops that has sort of never learned how to police in the first place now. Why should a cop chase an armed man down an alley? Like it's dangerous. What a deal we as the public, that we had men and women willing to do this. And so a lot of cops, again, because of forced overtime, because of pressure, because, if you don't have enough officers out there, you'll be told basically, don't make an arrest unless you absolutely have to. Because once you make an arrest, you're going to spend hours with the paperwork and the booking. So so all that happened and there was a lot less policing. And the thing is, look, it was related to COVID. 2020 was related to COVID, but the depolicing and the violence did not start until after Floyd was murdered and the civil unrest. That is what caused the increase in violence. Every other country in the world, by the way, crime went down except America. The idea that, of course, COVID came, so everyone started shooting each other more. No, that's not why.
Well, I'm curious, what were your thoughts on what happened with George Floyd? When you looked at that video, what were you seeing?
I was baffled to some extent. I will say I feel sorry for the cops who were on the scene who were also convicted. I think they were unfairly prosecuted. I just want to get that out of the way. But I would ask, why was Chauvin a field training officer? Why is he? There were actually systemic issues involved. I'm not unsympathetic to the idea that, Floyd, look, he was convicted of murder, so it's resolved legally. There is, sometimes people do die in stressful situations and the fact that they're, getting choked. But that doesn't defend it. It was the length of it, I was as baffled as most people, but I think unlike most people, I could ask some other deeper questions about what is going on there. There was also some irony that Minneapolis in particular has always been a relatively progressive police department. And they were getting all the treatments about police legitimacy. And I don't want to say those things didn't improve things, but they didn't work enough because that happened. There was a whole that anyway. There was a little cottage industry of sort of police reformers who would go around and try and make policing better, and that was one of the places they were centered.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please interrupt.
Did you see just sort of, well, it's not random, it is connected. I couldn't believe this when I saw it. The Minneapolis cop, Mohammed Noor, who shot that like pregnant Australian woman,
Yeah,
just like she was.
that was a bad shooting. There you go.
He's out of jail. He got out of jail in like 3 years or something.
Really?
Oh, you didn't know that? Yep.
No, I
Yeah,
did
he's
not
out
know
of
he got
jail.
out.
Yeah. A few years ago too. Yeah.
I mean, look, prosecution is politically motivated, and that's not always wrong. But I mean, that's
That's
an
insane.
example of it. I mean, that was a horrible shooting. But you could, yeah.
He was in jail
Though-
for
though-
2.5 years.
I mean, obviously, that's not enough for murder. What was he convicted of? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
I mean, legally, I mean, I'm always. It was a far worse shooting. Not that Floyd was shot, but a far worse, I would say, police-involved death. But legally, like, it was just so incompetent. I mean, it was clearly negligent, but it's like I don't think he'd said like I'm going to go kill that woman. He just I don't know. Who knows? It's I can't figure out why
What
he
was
shot
his
her at all.
explanation? He just like saw someone approaching the vehicle and he just like snapped.
Something like
he
that.
shot her.
I don't remember. I do remember like this makes no sense. And I mean, at the very least, you are a horrible cop, which I mean, I think is pretty obvious. But yeah, the fact that it like wasn't premeditated, that's why you get less time in a way. But come on now.
So
Yeah, why don't we pick on the cops that all the cops think should be in prison? Like that would be a good start.
there's been this interesting story about traffic fatalities. So is this the case that they sort of have spiked recently?
They certainly spiked during COVID. I forget what last year's, if they're still going up or if I don't know which way it's trending. But I mean, that was one of the easiest examples. If you don't work, you can't get in trouble is, make fewer car stops. And this again was actively encouraged by many jurisdictions for cops not to stop people because of racial disparities. But so they said, okay, we won't. I mean, it was at least in New York City, it's just visible how much more reckless cars got, and even how much more often cars run red lights and things like that. And the idea was, well, we'll go to camera enforcement and that, but of course that revealed many of the same racial disparities because it was about traffic violations, and so that kind of made some people scratch their head, like, oh, I thought the problem was just racist cops pulling over people because they're black, and traffic cameras were then, I mean, the whole racial disparity. I mean, this is America. There are racial disparities, and police have to police the real world, and the real world reflects those disparities. But it's kind of odd that the buck stops with the cops on that issue. But yeah, I'm all for traffic, and I mean, I don't have a car in New York City, so I love it when I love traffic enforcement.
In retrospect, it's very interesting to think about 2020 because so many of those issues and the talking points are just totally gone. Like, I mean, not totally, but like it was sort of like, I guess people say it was like some kind of social. I wonder, I'd be very curious, probably impossible. I think TikTok was around then. I'd be curious about what, if there was any role there, but do you think there was something about the COVID? Because remember, Floyd happened right when COVID happened. So people were cooped up. Then the weather gets warm, and then you have this thing. Do you think it was like almost there was like kindling? It was because
to some extent, yeah, and that's where I say, I mean, COVID was certainly related. It was the last week of May, and then things went to hell in a handcart in June and July. So yeah, I mean, it was the first time. Yeah, people. I mean, the idea of I think getting outside was part of it. Yeah, I mean, there was certainly something. I mean, we're just 5 years later now, but it's. I mean, I think it's easy and maybe good to forget just how crazy that was. It was going into the vast unknown. I mean, and there's still, to some extent, I think, yeah, people just wanted to protest. And, since then, okay, I mean, sometimes literally the same protesters, then they could protest Israel instead of cops. Oh, well, okay, but the fact that it had such a groundswell of support, there was obviously a nerve that was touched. It also, I don't want to, I mean, none of this stuff is inevitable. I don't believe that. But s- body cameras had been around for a few years, but I think it was the first time a lot of people started routinely seeing cops shoot people in videos, um, or in this case, choke someone out and kill them. Um, and so I don't think a lot of people, and I'm thinking like particularly like middle class progressive white people, are very oblivious to the violence that goes on in this country. Um, I mean, it's something I felt when I was a cop in Baltimore policing the Eastern District, and then I go to some hipster party in Brooklyn on the weekend. Like, they really have no clue, I would think, about these tender, soft people who don't. Yeah. So for people to see the violence that is in the police world and then concentrate it and again, look, most days are not going to end in violence, but um, there was a lot of reality snuff films basically on video. Um, and you're not even seeing a random example of police use of violence. It was almost always a black person getting shot, usually by a white cop. So it did form, and it was the social media aspect. Yeah, I don't want to say it was brand new, but there was something new and novel about the way this was being presented, how it was being presented, and I think that impacted people and society.
Just a story you'll appreciate. During 2020, I went to a party at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park, and they are pretty much genius kids, who can talk a mile a minute. But I remember we were all drinking beer, and they were telling me we have to abolish the police. And I just smiled as I watched the University of Chicago's private police SUV crawl down the street. Just you have the largest private police in the world, and it just exemplified exactly.
It does, and one of the ways politically, I mean, the people who want to abolish police, I'm happy to ignore them if they don't have political power. I mean, and I'm friends with many of them, but the way I think politically is, look, if you live in Englewood, say, or Jackson Park, or the west side of Chicago, and you think police should be abolished, I will respectfully disagree, but respectfully, and you live there and I don't, and that is your right. And hell, you might. But it's for the privileged white people who want to take policing away from others, and those others are less privileged, black and brown people. It's racist. It's morally wrong. It's people die because of this, and they and I. The racist part, of course, always strikes a nerve, but I think it has to be confronted as that. I mean, black people in America want more policing more than white people do. Poll after poll shows that. To ignore that is just it's to me it's unconscionable. Boy, I mentioned that fact to some editor at the Atlantic. I think well, I don't know if it was in 2020. No, it was before COVID, but it was after Black Lives Matter movement, and she just didn't she refused to believe it. And I eventually, after I send her the links to the Pew and Gallup sites that consistently show this, but it just blew her mind. And I was like, well, maybe you really do need to get out of your bubble a little bit. I should also add that poll after poll shows that black people more than white people want better policing. So, it's not that nuanced, and they're not mutually exclusive. But
Yeah,
yeah, abolish is not popular among anybody except that people at that party you were at.
one, I'm not glad Trump won at all, but one perhaps positive impact of the fact that he did better with African American and Latino voters is there's sort of been this realization that, if you thought that, oh, you know what Latinos want? Open borders. That's what they really want. Or you know what black voters want? No, they want less police. That the groups, as they're called, in D.C., that there's a new sort of skepticism. Like, well, do you really represent the group? When you say,
yeah, there's a neighborhood in Queens near me, Corona. I don't know what the Chicago equivalent would be. Maybe Pilsen, but Pilsen's more established. Anyway, Corona is heavily immigrant, Latin American, recent immigrants, statistically very poor. It's a great neighborhood, by the way, and it voted for Trump majority, and that blew my mind. I was kind of warned about this, by the way. I know somebody who lives there, and for the past couple of years, he's been telling me how the Democrats and progressives are ignoring every problem they have. But to have a poor immigrant minority, non-white community vote for Trump, and it was just a slight majority, but still a majority. I was like, wow, that's, I mean, both terrifying and there are lessons to be learned. And I mean, I'm not always right, but for years I've been saying that the left and Democrats need to a public safety policy. You're not, if you abandon law and order, you are leaving a void that will be filled by the MAGA right, and we are in the process of seeing that, and it terrifies me of where this might go. When it would have been so easy to simply say, we think criminals should be locked up. These aren't bold statements. I support policing when it's done right. The same polling organizations, the reputable ones, they always, there was one of them, I don't forget which, has confidence in institutions, and they're always really low. But there are three institutions that for decades have the top three in terms of public views favorably are small businesses, military, and police. You're not going to win elections by not supporting those three groups. And often the sniping, of course, is coming from groups like academia that are down now and 18% approval or whatever. But that we dropped. I say we. When I say we, I mean Democrats. I guess people. We dropped the ball on that, and we let the progressives take over and didn't push back on them. And now Trump is in office again.
I'm very sympathetic to the progressives on certain issues, taxation, healthcare. The other stuff, I don't know, I'm not sure about. But, I think
I like bike lanes and public transportation. Right. I'm sympathetic on that, too.
Right.
So.
But I think what you're saying is so true. Like, for instance, immigration is a great example. And what I say is basically the Democrats, in a way, they don't have an immigration policy because anytime it comes up, all they want, basically, their immigration policy is, can we please not talk about this subject? And you see that on a few different subjects.
Well, often because, look, I'm not, I don't have a magic wand to wave, but at some level, I'm kind of open border policy. I mean, I'm very pro-immigration. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the reason I like living in New York City that is filled with immigrants, and most people are not born here. Politically, that's obviously not what the American people want. It's also not what immigrants want. But the Republicans could claim this issue if they said we're actually going to try to increase legal immigration. They could own this in even a better way. But I think there is a root of xenophobia and racism there that will prevent that from happening. But there is no. I don't know what the Democratic policy on this stuff is, and of course it's a combined. So Corona, this neighborhood in Queens, and their objections, according, this is based on like two people I know, and primarily one who told me these specific things, but their objections, they say why life here has gotten worse is because there's now open prostitution, there's public drug use, there are migrant shelters, too much illegal vending and more crime. And every one of those issues was a direct result of policy and law that was imposed on them by the Democratic establishment, either at the city level or the state level. And this same neighborhood, by the way, voted for AOC. Like, what a weird Venn diagram, the Trump AOC voters. I don't think Trump is going to help them on these issues. Well, I guess immigration could, but the other ones are local issues. But they just said enough of this. You're making bad policy, and it's not. Well, they don't know if it's affecting my neighborhood, but it's affecting us. So yeah, they're.
I
can't
you
win
know
election.
I visited New York City twice during the pandemic. It was interesting. Fox News was running all this stuff about crime is out of control in New York, and I'll just say, obviously, it's anecdotal, but I went to New York when they were saying that, and I flew my drone right by one of the bridges across from the UN.
That's my bridge. That's the Queensboro
Yeah, it was
Bridge.
right, and there were projects behind me, and I sat at a bench, and I felt so safe. It was the whole everywhere I went seemed very safe to me.
Yeah, well, it's funny. New York has made me soft. I first visited New York when I was in high school in Evanston, Illinois, our hometown. In 1988, I came to New York City, and arguably that was the city at its most violent or near most violent. And even then, I was like, "Oh my God, what a great place! Someday I'm going to live there." I sort of joke that like Chicago made me a city boy, and quite frankly, New York I think is a better city. But so in that period, late 80s, New York had more than 2,000 murders. 1990, 1991. In 2015, I have spreadsheets with this, but off the top of my head, it was under 300. It was a year Chicago had 700 or 800, by the way. New York is almost 3 times as large. So New York, I mean, I travel to other cities, be it Chicago or Philadelphia or Baltimore, and when I'm in those other cities, I'm like, oh, that's right. There's danger here, and I have to be more aware and use the urban savvy that I grew up knowing, being in Chicago. So yeah, New York is doing okay. That said, so fuck Fox News for all that stuff. New York is fine at some level, but but it has gotten a lot worse. It's gotten a lot worse on the subways, though I still think, from what I hear, that your average ride in New York City subway is far better than your average ride right now on the L. And I think older New Yorkers are triggered a little bit because they do remember 1990, and when crime was going up in New York City, you heard a lot of well, it was worse in 1990. Yeah, so what? Why are we using the worst, most violent year ever as somehow the baseline for what the city should be? So I think, because things had gotten so good in a way, partly that allowed people to forget that policing was a big part of why the city got safer. But it's the trend that you say,
Yeah.
the shootings are getting a little bit closer to where I live personally. Where shootings happen a lot, they got a lot worse. But there is, it's crazy people on the subway, and there are not that many of them, but they cause a huge amount of quality of life and public order complaints.
That reminds me of my of the 3 trips. There was one trip I went to New York during the pandemic where I stayed in Midtown Manhattan. And that one was very memorable because the first thing I saw when I entered Manhattan was a guy without a shirt with a huge metal pole. It was probably 2 a.m. in like the financial district, and he was just bashing it on the ground. I was like, oh no, it was 2 guys fighting with metal stick. And that trip, I'm remembering that the amount of crazy people yelling down the street and stuff was very noticeable. And I wanted to ask you about that because the center of a lot of our like online discussions about crime will be these subway videos, right? There's a famous one I'm sure you've seen where there's a crazy guy. I'm sorry. What is the? Is there a more sensitive word for that?
Person in crisis.
Okay, person in crisis. There's this video where the guy is swinging and he goes, huh, huh.
Stop it. Stop it.
Remember that?
They do.
Yeah. And I remember,
but not hitting people, right? Just like
right,
fake,
but
yeah.
very close to their face. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
women in the video are like terrified, pretty much. And I remember, I think it was Emma Vigeland retweeted it and said, "Just listen to your podcast. Shut the fuck up." It was like, you'd see these people like, "Hey, shut the fuck up. Listen to your podcast. He didn't hurt anybody. Stop being a racist." And I thought to myself, wow, if you want to talk about horrible politics on an issue, that would probably be the way you should respond.
Yeah, and that has been a certain far left response to these incidents. But they cause trauma. Also, like, you know what? Those are never one-offs. That person needs help. And here's the other part that I think these policies come from a racist root, which is, I think, in a certain progressive world, they believe that, oh, that's how they are, and we just have to accept it. It's not their fault. It's because of systemic racism in history. But there's an incredibly condescending tone that somehow behavior is acceptable among certain groups. And I can't speak for anybody else, but and there was a shooting not far from me in which a local city council person, first of all, they wouldn't use the word shooter, which was irksome. Because you don't want to judge, you don't want to label somebody by their worst act. But they said people of the Woodside houses need to put down their guns. And that's where this woman got shot. And I was like, the people of the Woodside houses don't have guns. They're hardworking people. And I was like, oh, you think that they're violent people there. We're talking 10 people who were having a feud with people from the Astoria home. Like it was a gang beef, a clique beef. And the guy thought it was, I was speaking to the whole community. And meanwhile, the community then marched on the police station demanding more policing. But that is part of the problem, is people, again, who are very out of touch, sort of excusing certain behaviors because it's done by a certain group and that group is disadvantaged when the victims are usually, anyway. So that guy swinging the pole, yeah, I don't know what help he needs, but he needs to not be hurting other people. And like, I stay in my lane a little bit. Like, I'd be happy if we had mental health care and housing, though it's not always about housing. Some of these people are housed and still crazy. But I do know how we can police our way out of this problem, which is by putting, not locking them up forever, but we've given up on deterrence. There was a guy who I confronted, two other people were with me in Manhattan. A disheveled guy, barefoot. I know, oh, he's barefoot. It was not weather appropriate. And he spit on this woman walking by, and she kind of ran away, and I followed him a bit. And then it turns out, long story short, he had been a neighborhood terror, including in the past hour. So there were other people looking for him, and they were kind of tough guys. And they're like, "We're going to call the cops." And I was like, the cops aren't going to do anything. But there was this brief moment where the three of us are surrounding this guy saying, like, why are you punching and spitting on random women right now? And he's like, I don't know. I mean, he wasn't with it really, and of course, these guys were like, how come you won't hit me? And he was like, no, I won't hit you. My point being, anyway, the cops did come and then they did. I had to go to work. I don't know. I think they did end up taking him into Bellevue, the mental ward. But he had enough. He wasn't so out of it that he was going to hit people who were going to punch him back. It's a very simple level of deterrence. But policing that, stop doing that or I'll lock you up, I think is an underrated deterrence. And if we've lost that, then there have to be consequences for bad behavior. Not life-changing necessarily, but something.
What is because I think this is like a big problem, especially because people just stop using like the L, for instance. I mean, when public transportation becomes a mobile mental hospital, with people peeing, screaming, people who are in some state of psychosis. People, stop using public transport and stuff. But how should we handle? Because it's simple when somebody's stabbing someone. We all know what the answer is. That, but when somebody is just screaming or yeah.
I have the answer to this, damn it. First, I want to say, having grown up in Evanston, I used to ride that L back at used to be 24 hours, at all hours and all conditions back from, wherever, anywhere, usually between, Belmont and Rogers Park. I knew that late night schedule. I think I still do, by heart. I never had an issue on the L. I never remember ever seeing someone smoke on the L. Crazy people. Now, keep in mind, back in those days, there was an actual conductor, pay-on-train conductor, who would basically serve as a police, security guard and go around and collect fares. That was part of it. But part of it was simply, you can misbehave in certain places. You can't misbehave in other places. If you want to go to the, beach at 2 a.m. and have a party, you can do that. Maybe get chased off at some point. But there's certain places, like with homeless encampments in New York City, we don't allow homeless encampments, which is why we don't have them. It's a political choice. But we don't allow people to set up tents in Central Park or commit that kind of behavior. We choose not to. We could simply enforce the rules on public transportation. Public transportation is unique because the crimes have more impact, I think, to a city at large. I think perhaps CTA police should be brought back. I think in Chicago in particular, it's horribly under-policed and ignored by the Chicago Police Department. New York City got rid of a separate transit police department in '95, but there still is a transit bureau that's very focused on, that's their job. New York made the decision to stop enforcing quality of life rules on the subway when the Second Avenue subway opened up. I forget what year that was. I think 2017. And I was told by a transit cop with many years on, just retired last week, in fact, and he's in my book. He said, "Peter, it's going to be the Taj Mahal of homeless shelters." I said, "What do you mean?" And he told me that there was new policy, and I've never been able to find this in writing, but he was not making it up, saying that we're no longer supposed to eject homeless people from the subway. We are supposed to offer services, they'll decline services, and then we're supposed to walk away and leave them be. Because there are some people who want the system to be a de facto homeless shelter, and they're wrong. It's not fair to the homeless people. It's not fair to us as riders. And from that, and that's when the subway started getting worse, because we no longer enforce subway rules. The rules are still there, but you just people have to know you don't when you get on the L or get on the train here. You behave, and if you don't, you'll get in trouble.
That policy change, I think, affects the CTA a lot more than in New York City because nobody drives in New York, so more people are forced to take it, so that sort of helps with the policing. But in the Chicago, often it's a choice. Going from Evanston to Loop, you can drive. I mean, if you could, and so people are not taking the train. There was a guy.
But, here's another litmus test: is are you taking the train to get somewhere? If the answer is no, then at the end of the line, and ideally in cooperation with social services, then you can't ride the train. This isn't that complicated, but it needs there has to be the political will to do that.
I hate to confess this because I consider myself somebody on the left, but I openly question I think maybe privatizing the CTA or doing a contract thing like they do in Japan, where I think maybe it's not totally insane, but
there's a fabulous New York City ferry system now. And,
it's great. Yeah.
It's funny, it got criticism from transit advocates for somehow not being. That's not my point. My point is it is privately run. It's contracted out by the city. And what do you know? They enforce rules, and a lot of people ride it because once you get on, you know that there's not going to be some person following up the place literally or figuratively.
There was a guy who threw somebody on the tracks in New York, and I think he had 50 previous arrests recently. How does that happen? Like, I understand people thought 3 strikes you're out was way too punitive in California, but like,
How about 50 strikes?
yeah, 40 strikes you're out. But how does that happen? Why?
It happens because we passed laws that prevent that person from anything from happening to that person until they actually kill somebody or seriously hurt them. Again, it's a political choice. It's part of, bail and discovery reform that happened here, which was a huge thing. And it's not, and all of that reform wasn't bad, but parts of it were bad. And again, a lot of the people behind it are not actually trying to make the system better. That's a small price to pay for the abolition of jails and prisons. I mean, perhaps we should have escalating sentences. The first offense, maybe you do get a slap on or no slap on the wrist, but by the fifth and sixth and seventh, but I mean, it's this is the way the law is written, and yet when you try to have a serious conversation, and the police commissioner is talking about this now here in New York City, the problem are these recidivists who are getting arrested dozens and dozens of time. And we could change the law, but you need political will.
It's just a small. Is this a phenomenon where there's just a small group of individuals who commit just tons of crimes, and they like really can just wreck the kind of. They can do a lot of damage, for instance, to the subway. Just is that the case?
Yes, is the short answer.
Right.
It is not that many people, and they are known by name and date of birth to transit police officers. Like one of the things, I mean, it just shows the opposition to this. The MTA would like to be able to ban recidivist transit offenders from the subway. And they say, well, how can you really keep someone out? You can't. But what it means is, here's a man who goes in and grabs women's asses every day. That's all he does. And he does it every day. And then if he is banned from the system, the transit cops walk him come in and they know what he's going to do, but he hasn't done it yet. So it would allow them to say, Peter, you got to leave or I'll lock you up. You're not allowed here. That seems reasonable to me. Or, he could be a pickpocket or, it doesn't have to be some, sexual assault thing. But people fight that. Well, how is he going to get to work? I don't know. First of all, he doesn't have a job. He can take the bus, okay? There is common sense reform, and we can't get it done. And yeah, if we focused on these recidivist offenders, it is such a small number of people that, it basically break down social trust.
Yeah, it's just wild to me. There isn't, for instance, like on drug stuff. I am very liberal on that. For instance, like I think like a cop who like pulls some guy over for speeding in Nebraska, and then he's just some asshole cop and he wants to search the car and let's say he finds a little baggie of cocaine or whatever, and then he takes the guy to jail, like ruins his life, and the guy. I mean that I consider that cop basically kind of evil, like those cops who like just want to, but violent crime. When you're stabbing, when you're touching women's ass, there should just be a distinction. I think
people want to empty the jails because, I mean, I get the arguments why. I used to be more sympathetic to them even. I mean, there are no people now in New York or Chicago no one's at, was it California in 26? Where's the jail? Yeah. No one's there because of a nickel bag of weed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's history. Does it still happen in Nebraska? I don't know. I kind of doubt that, but I can't speak for Nebraska. A lot of these sort of reforms are based on how things used to be. But they're not that way anymore. There was a specific homeless person outside of Central Park. You notice he was outside, not inside, because he wouldn't be permitted to be inside. So even he knew the rules. Uh, I in just horrible shape. I could just see him, twitching beneath a blanket, kind of. And one day I walked by him a couple times a week. And and he stunk. And I saw social services there. I was like, hey, great, this is the system working now, right? Um, and they offered him socks and some food, and then they left because he declined. He's there because he's declining help. Like, he needs help. Anyway, then I saw him, in the New York. Then he got hit and killed by a car like a couple weeks later, and I don't know who he was. I only saw his actual physical being once or twice. Um, but how do we literally left him there to die, under some idea that he was in a mental state where he could decline help and choose to live like that. And I mean, and the part, so, yeah, that bothers me. Let me just say that we're letting people die on the streets.
Right.
What also bothers me is, I gotta say, I feel bad that that little part of my walk is a lot nicer now that I don't have to pass him, and that bothers me that, like, oh, because he's dead. But I'm just being honest. That's
Yeah. You have a really interesting book about to come out called Back from the Brink, which is about, the full title is Back from the Brink, Inside the NYPD and New York City's Extraordinary 1990s Crime Drop.
You like the way I tried to summarize the book in the subtitle?
I think it's a great title, great book idea, and I can't wait to get the audiobook when it comes out.
You might be waiting for a while. It's still not in the works, but hopefully it will be.
Well, but here's my question. I believe there's going to be a next generation. Who? I'm going to get the names wrong. So who were the major? It was Giuliani. Who was the commissioner?
Bill Bratton.
Bill Bratton. Okay. So I believe there's going to be a new Bill Bratton and Giuliani somewhere in the world. And here's what I think is going to happen because of the AI, the robotics, what's about to come online. And here's how I think it's going to happen. Play this out with me. People are like, oh, we'll never have police robots. No. We'll never have that, right? They say that. And I was thinking about it. I was thinking, here's how it's going to work. It's going to be a New York Times article which shows Mexico City subway crime drops 70% as their budget costs go down 90% or something like that. And it'll be because they put in this Chinese humanoid robot that it can't kill anyone, but it just, whatever. It just does, it monitors, people feel like they're being watched. And what will tempt American City will be the way it reduces labor costs. So play this out with me. What do you think the police unions are they just going to say no?
I don't think they'll care because I don't think it'll work because those robots will not deter or prevent crime. Ultimately, surveillance can help catch people after the fact. Surveillance doesn't prevent crime. People commit crimes right under cameras. You need a human element. You need discretion and common sense. People are just going to flip their finger at any robot and say, what are you going to do about it? Though a couple back, maybe 10 years ago now, there was a case, I think, in Dallas where it was the first time a police robot killed somebody intentionally. Some gunman, and I forget if the robot had I forget how, whether it exploded or grenade or gun. Yeah. And it was a good shooting and no one else got hurt at that point. But it was kind of like, ooh, that's a brave new world. And it wasn't AI, it was being controlled by somebody. So what's that? So before I dismiss it too quickly, what does that robot do? Okay.
What if it face scans you and sends you a ticket?
At some point, you're still going to need enforcement. I don't care if I get a ticket.
Mm-hmm.
It's like speed cameras. Well, you still, first of all, I mean, yeah, I have to have something to lose. I'm uh, at some point, then you're still gonna have to send a cop to my door to take me in if it reaches that level. Um, but I mean, I want the face scan issue. It's not crazy. We're not quite there yet, but
Larry Ellison was saying it's crazy we still have police chases when they should just send out a drone. And I was thinking about it. I was like, that does seem correct to me. Do you think that's coming?
of course, a lot of the anti-policing people are very against drones. At some point, it's inevitable. Like policing will catch up with technology, maybe later rather than sooner. Drones can do 90% of what police helicopters do, if nothing else. I don't want this guy buzzing with drones. I also don't want this guy buzzing with helicopters, for that matter. Um, you still, at some point, though, you still have to apprehend the person who's trying to run away. So chases are dangerous, and as much as a drone would stop that, that's great. Okay, so now you're still watching the guy. I mean, maybe still have to send a cop to grab him. And he's going to run again. Then what?
What? I think there will be a hesitation to let the robot police kill or
I
shoot.
hope so.
But what if they develop some technology where like they can cuff somebody pretty good without killing them? One city somewhere somewhere in the world, one city will take a chance on that. And what if it works?
It'll be, Singapore or El Salvador. Well, it won't. We're so far away from that working that I'm willing to. Yeah, it's still a bit too science fiction. I'm not saying it could never happen. If you were compliant with it, it could. But then if you're compliant, then you don't need the robot either. Maybe we should get in a robot repairman. That's where the jobs are going to be.
I'm curious, as a criminologist, the onset of the police cameras, that must have been for a criminologist like a dream come true. Like you can now, and I've watched that. They are,
You mean body cams or surveillance cameras?
Body cams. They are fascinating videos. I've watched body cams where there was one case, I wonder if you saw it, where it was this African-American guy in this huge estate, I think in Florida or South Carolina, and he was clearly like having an episode, and there's like, do not touch me, and it was like, I think he ended up dying, sadly. He tried to fight the police and take their gun. But I watched it. It was like 40 minutes. It was like...
Is there a motorcycle cop involved in that?
No.
No. Okay, I'm thinking of a case in L.A. then.
Yeah. But it was just fascinating viewing. Like these... How much body cams do you watch? Like...
Not very much.
Really? Okay.
I mean, I do. There are some YouTube stuff I occasionally watch. I was a professor at a friend of mine, Jerry Radcliffe. I was listening to his podcast yesterday, and he quoted me. I was like, "Hey, it's always funny to listen to a podcast while cooking and hear your name mentioned." But I forgot it was my line, but it is. And I said, when good policing is boring. It's only interesting when something goes wrong, and I don't. So if I'm watching videos, it's either boring or something has gone wrong. And often, that's what went wrong can be educational. But I don't really want to watch.
Well, even when, but for instance, like there was this kid who like murdered a homeless person in somewhere in Colorado. I don't know if you heard about that. And I was just watching the body cam. They apprehend him. He comes willingly. But it was very revealing about, okay, this is what a psychotic 19-year-old killer sounds like. Totally emotionally detached. It hasn't given you insight into criminals or no?
Well, I mean, I was a cop, so
okay.
I got
you already knew.
It was in the pre-body cam era, though. It has changed police. I mean, when they came out, and originally it was supposed to, like, people who hated policing loved them because they thought it was going to show how horrible cops were. And then next thing you know, defense attorneys are like, how can we get rid of body cams? Because basically they were showing that, like, sometimes you get, and people would not believe the cop because they were thinking that suspect, no one would act that crazy. Well, watch the video, and they're like, oh, I guess that's exactly what happened. And then if the cop really does bad, well, and it's on tape too. Good for that. Uh, it does probably reduce discretion a little bit, which I think it's bad to reduce officer discretion. I went on a ride along a couple years ago when I was in Baltimore, and I was like, whoa, the body cam's a game changer because I can't like stand back here and like crack jokes. Um, I suppose that's fine. Society will be fine without me making jokes at crime scenes. But it's it's inevitable. All departments still don't have them because they're expensive for the data storage part of it's expensive. But I mean, yeah, that's part of the new world now of policing is that there's footage of it all.
Why is Jacksonville and because one of the interesting things is like Fox will say, "Oh, the blue cities are the most dangerous places," and maybe some of them are, but when
Not
you
generally.
look at yeah, well, when you look at the data, pops out is like a city like Jacksonville is much more dangerous than New York City or something. It has more.
Most cities are more dangerous than New
Yeah,
York City.
yeah. With these cities, like you mentioned, Oklahoma City. What are a few others? Jacksonville, that are sort of high gun crime.
Well, and I was specifically talking about police
Oh,
shooting people in these cities. But in terms of general violence, I mean, cities that pop into my mind are well, of course, Baltimore. Baltimore's gotten a lot. Murders have plummeted there. It's worth pointing out in the past couple of years. St. Louis, Jackson, Mississippi. Um, Ironically, Portland, Oregon, it's gotten noteworthy in violence, but it's always it's segregated and even hyper segregated in certain areas. I'm even There's no city that's entirely dangerous, and there are very few cities that are entirely safe. It's just a question of how big the dangerous neighborhoods are. Often those neighborhoods are sort of at similar levels of violence, with like a murder rate of like 100 per 100,000 for a geographic area.
my friend was saying he was going to get a gun, and I told him not to do it. And I said, there's all this data that like it increases your chance of suicide. Or I told him, I said, okay, buy it, but dig a hole in the woods and like bury it there 3 feet deep and go to it in an emergency. Um, do you have a view on that? Of is it good to? I mean, like, I guess I'm saying if you don't live in a dangerous area.
And if you do, I mean, so I had a gun for 2 years, felt safer with it. Um, but then I was very happy to go to a place where I don't feel the need for a gun. I mean, look, the gun, I mean, the only way it's going to keep you safer is if you're threatened and you brandish it, and that resolves the situation. Or you're threatened and you use it, and that could resolve the situation. But um, it is there. Yeah, there's a danger to it's not. It's nicer. I know most of America, I think, disagrees with me. It's nicer not to have a gun because it's a burden. Just like I think it's nicer not to have a car. It's another burden I don't have to worry about. Um, by and large, I can still, yeah, I don't feel threatened. Um, though there was an incident on the subway last year in which I might have shot somebody had I had a gun because he wanted to kill me. He didn't. Um, in that sense, because I wasn't hurt, I'm happy I didn't have a gun because I didn't shoot him, but I might have. Uh, you're more likely to get involved in stuff that isn't your business if you have a gun. If someone is getting, assaulted, uh, I might jump in. Depends, if I thought I could do so without, I don't want to say safely, but without too much risk. But no, I'd call police. If you have a gun, you would and perhaps should have more of an obligation to intervene, and then bad things might happen, or you might save the day. But it's it's always there, that gun, and it changes. You have to be more alert. I don't miss that hyper awareness I had when I carried a gun.
What's the best police force in the world?
I don't think that can be answered because I
Top
think,
five.
well, first of all, I don't know, uh, because different places and countries require different policing. Um, I do think there's been some recent, leaving aside uh, corruption at the top of the NYPD recently in the past few years, since Adams has been mayor, which you shouldn't leave aside. But let's go back a couple years. I think the NYPD, in many ways, is probably the best police department, large police department in America, and some of that's quantifiable, and some, the British have a different model of policing. I have done research in England. I've done research in the Netherlands and Amsterdam. They're good in different ways, and they're flawed in different ways, but it's not, they're different measures of success for these different departments. England is not worried about reducing the number of people killed by cops because the number is near zero. So it's a whole.
They're worried about knives. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're less worried about safety because they can. That's a certain luxury. But yeah, they have stab vests, not bulletproof vests. There. Yeah.
What's one of the worst police departments in America?
Oh, it's one we've never heard of. I don't mean that to dodge, to be facetious. It's some small town.
Okay, major of the major.
I don't.
It's okay.
There's not a single one that jumps to mind, honestly. There's certain ones. I mean, I can tell you, let's use. I think Chicago. I'm not saying it's the worst. Chicago's got issues.
I had a bad run-in with them
in merit promotion. Every time there's a scandal in Chicago, it's always someone who is, quote, merit promoted. Merit means it means you've got a connection, and you did not pass the civil service exam. It's a horrible system. So they did away with it briefly, and then it came back because people want their, older people want their friends' nephews promoted or whatever. And it also, the other reason I think I'm hesitant is because in a large city, you can get isolated, horrible, corrupt criminal units that aren't reflective of the department, but are very real and exist. So, I wasn't in Baltimore when the gun trace task force scandal happened, but I can easily see how it could have been going on while I had been there, and not know about it. It wasn't affecting me or my day-to-day job. So it's policing is local, and it is personal interaction. And yes, some departments are better than others, but it does come down to sort of that individual action. I wish I could answer that.
That's
I'm not trying to evade it. It's
totally fine.
Yeah.
I was reading John Ganz's book, The Year the Clock Broke, which was about 1992. Great book, by the way. But one of the characters that showed up, he focused on New Orleans, was this sheriff. Do you know about this guy? He was like Chinese American segregationist guy that was sheriff till he was like 98.
Was he the one that was blocking bridges after Katrina?
He might have been. He served forever, but I was.
By the way, I will say, I didn't say it, but I will say I was thinking of New Orleans when asked about worst police departments. But that's not fair because I don't know the current situation there, and I think they have actually gotten better. But it did pop into my mind.
Well, I was gonna say, sheriffs who, when you look at history.
Oh, and the worst police department will be a sheriff's department.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the political oversight that most police departments do. It'll be someone elected, a small department, and it'll just be.
I was going to ask, are there sheriffs because the history of policing is a very fascinating thing. Are there sheriffs that, just pop out to you as the craziest or?
Well, there was always Sheriff Joe in Arizona. Yeah. So that he made the news a lot when he was. Is he still alive? I don't know.
Yeah, he is still alive.
Trump pardoned him the first time, right? Didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Yep.
At least he was coming up with new ideas, though. I'll give.
I
didn't always like them.
He made them wear pink.
Yeah, I don't think they were good ideas, but at least he was thinking outside of the box.
Yeah.
The sheriff, a lot of sheriffs are just normal, they're huge county sheriff departments in many places. It really that just are basically police departments. Um, Texas and Maryland come to mind as places that have huge sheriff departments in counties. But if you have an elected, it can be for better or for worse. Do you know that vlogger? What's it? Peter Santinello? I don't think.
Yeah, I
That's,
do. Yep.
I like his stuff, by the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
He's done a couple with police departments. They're always sheriff departments because the sheriff says, "Yeah, they're less paranoid of I don't know what if something bad happens and then the mayor's going to say this." So that freedom and confidence they have can be can come out in both good and bad ways. But
Who are the best mayors in history that you've seen?
Richard M. Daley. No, I'm joking. I would love to go back to the age of Mike Bloomberg in New York
I
City.
was just about to say Bloomberg.
Though he let the police commissioner Ray Kelly stop question and frisk went crazy in New York City during that era, and it set police back decades. And it didn't have to happen, and so that is unfortunate. Crime also went down during most of this era, and there was no big corruption scandal. It wasn't all bad, but boy, just to have a competent, non-corrupt political leader, how refreshing that would be in Chicago or New York right now.
Chicago. I remember when I wanted to close
you
on.
must know people that voted for him, right?
Who? Oh,
Johnson.
Brandon Johnson. Yeah, I did actually.
So, I don't talk to that many people in Chicago anymore. What do they admit they were wrong?
I'm thinking of a specific writer, and I gotta talk to him. I'm not sure on that one. I wanted to close on Chicago, my beloved city.
I got Polish sausage, Vienna beef Polish sausages in my freezer, man. Sometimes I just jones for them.
It's very, when I think about Chicago a lot, and I think because I wanted to do well, and I think about cities a lot, and I think the truth about cities, especially if you're on the left, is extreme. It makes you look really bad. The truth about cities that are not San Francisco, LA, or New York is this, and it doesn't sound good to say. You sound like a shill, but the truth is this. You need the rich people in the corporations that you have to stay. And if they don't like the mayor and they leave, you're sort of, everybody's going to pay the price for that. So, like, for instance, in New York, the Zorhan guy, he could become mayor of New York, okay?
He's my rep, by the way.
Yeah. And he, maybe he's good or bad. Maybe he's totally radical. New York will still be New York. It's irreplaceable. But if a guy who's like a, I don't know, DSA communist gets elected the mayor of Detroit or Cleveland or Chicago or Kansas City or Wichita and the Koch brothers leave, that doesn't work. The rest of us, except for those three cities, we can't get away with that.
Boston too.
Boston, yeah.
The tax base is important. I am always amazed at how in local elections it almost never comes up. Where is the money coming from? What we're gonna do this, and Mandami's a good example of he's promising a lot of stuff that costs a lot of money. It doesn't grow on trees. It's it's in New York City. It's collected through property tax, sales tax, and a personal income tax for New York City. But the budget's $112 billion. That's what we have to work with, and it's probably the single most important thing in the city is that budget and how we spend it and how we raise it. And it's never even an issue in elections, or was it in Chicago? I don't think so.
Do you agree with me that those three cities, though, they sort of live by a different?
A little bit. I mean, New York has the world reputation that helps it. It has finance, which is its sort of secret financial weapon.
Architecture.
But all that. Look, Detroit had architecture. Any city can go to hell if you do the right things or the wrong things and give it enough time. Um, you know, that's why my book is called Back from the Brink. People thought New York was going to go to hell. Maybe, I mean, especially if you go back further to the, Bronx's burning 70s and the city, about to declare bankruptcy. And there was no sense that it was somehow survived because it was New York, though it did. Um, and I think, are there cities that have seen good revivals? Um, is it always a one way? Well, New York saw a good revival. I mean, Chicago got better from when I was growing up to, say, 10 years ago. Uh, I mean, Richard J. Daley at least was he was, I would say, competent. I don't, he had other issues, but
when Rom left, I told people, I said, I'm not saying I love the guy, but just wait till we see who comes after him. And basically, like, it's very unpopular to say, but I want universal health care. I want higher taxes on a federal level. I don't want to do my left-wing politics on the mayor of Chicago level, and so that all the finance companies leave. That would be a disaster.
And then sometimes you get, well, we don't need them anyway. No, we do. We do very much.
Yeah, but you sound like I realize you sound like a bootlicker rich, but it's just the truth.
Also, to lick the rich's boots a bit, let's not forget the philanthropy part.
Yeah.
Even in New York, there's something called the Police Foundation, which is sort of, it's not quite a slush fund, but it's basically rich people in Manhattan saying they can buy things for the police department if they need it, or experiment with things without red tape. Those things matter.
I think Chicago needs, I hate to say it, we need a Rom type. We need a guy who's connected to corporations, who can reassure those people, the rich people, and get them to come back or stop leaving. I don't think left-wing politics, I don't think mayors, that's where you really want I want a Bloomberg, I want an accountant, a technocrat. I don't need my social revolution from the mayor. You know what I mean?
Well, you're preaching to the converted.
Yeah,
at least
yeah.
to
So
me.
I do worry about Chicago. The CTUs just, these people are.
Hey, I'm a union teacher, but I mean,
Yeah.
I think that, but I'm not part of the.
CTU's going to be celebrating Sinor's birthday every year. Soon enough, at Chicago
People have
Public.
spoken. They voted for the man.
So tell me, and you can tell me the brutal truth, but because I do see a positive path for Chicago where we could say, I think climate change is going to help us, and also we are much more affordable in a way that like New York won't be.
Chicago is still also a Midwest magnet, and that helps you get talent from everywhere, neighboring states. The power of the suburbs there, it's so much easier to leave the city limits in Chicago, I think, than even in New York. You're giving up a lot more if you move out of the city in New York, where the difference between, I mean, it's just, and there's nothing wrong with Evanston or Oak Park or wherever, or even further out.
Yeah. So, but are we screwed or any over?
I don't know, but I will. I mean, I'm always sort of seeing things through a public safety lens, but if you don't have public safety, you can't have nice things. It's the first step. It's the necessary but not sufficient step to a healthy city is people feeling and being safe. And we could work towards that. Enforcing gun laws we haven't talked about, but wow, that used to be a left-wing cause, and in many ways, the far left has given up on that. Well, that's unfortunate.
Right. As a Democrat, how did Kamala do? I think she was horrible, couldn't talk. And who should the Democrats pick next, or what should the party do?
I felt betrayed because I did not think Biden was losing it until the famous debate. And I mean, I don't think Harris was that bad, but clearly America disagreed with me. And at that point, I don't think there could have been someone else. Who's going to come up? I mean, I don't know. Is it going to be someone like Pete Buttigieg? There's got to be, somebody out there. But it's a very tough, because you're going to have to push back on the far left. That is going to criticize you no matter what you do. But I mean, I hope there's going to be a backlash against Trump, and whoever's the next Democrat's going to sweep into office overwhelmingly, or not. I don't know. Nobody jumps out. That's the problem. Is there's nobody obviously who I think, wow, that would be a great choice.
Well, if you could design the perfect new Democrat, like
some cross between Bill Clinton and Barack Obama would be it, and it would be someone more centrist, someone who is not.
I think that Obama, that speech style, that lofty rhetoric, I don't think that people want. Yeah.
Well, then maybe we'll take that part from Clinton.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Peter, for talking to me. I can't wait to look at your book now.
You and me both. All right, a pleasure. It's been great to talk to you.